Get ready, because today we're going to talk about one of my favorite plot devices, cliffhangers. By the way, my name is Brandon McNulty. I'm the author of Bad Parts, also the author of Entry Wounds, and welcome to my writing channel. One of my subscribers requested a video on the topic of cliffhangers, and this is something I've discussed again and again on the channel, but I've never actually devoted an entire video to the subject. So today we're going to talk about cliffhangers. I'm going to explain what they are, why you want to use them, some things to be aware of, some dangers to be aware of if you are using them, and then finally we're going to wrap up the video with some tips that'll help you master cliffhangers. But let's start with a definition. What is a cliffhanger? And it's a plot device in which part of the story is left unresolved. This means you're withholding information from the audience, and this is going to be information that the audience wants. They want to seek out this information. They want to continue reading the story. And cliffhangers will occur at the ends of scenes, chapters, episodes, or stories. And usually these scenes or chapters or whatever, they're going to end on an intense or a dramatic note, something that propels the story forward. So now that we've established what a cliffhanger is, now the question becomes, well, why do we need to use them? What do they add to a story? And one of the most important things they do, they create suspense and they intrigue the audience. This is a great way to keep your audience on board, to keep them pushing through your story. If you're writing a book, you want to end your chapters on cliffhangers. That makes it a page turner. That makes the audience want to seek the next chapters, want to see what happens next. Another reason to use cliffhangers, they help manage the pacing of your story. If your story is moving along too slowly, you might want to inject a cliffhanger at the end of a chapter. That'll ramp up the tension, that'll speed things up. You can also raise the stakes by using cliffhangers. If a chapter ends on a dramatic moment or somebody gets shot and you withhold the information about whether or not that character survives, that raises the stakes, that gets the audience engaged. Some genres especially rely heavily on cliffhangers, particularly thrillers, suspense stories, horror, and TV shows in general, especially TV shows where there are commercial breaks. Oftentimes right before a commercial break there will be a cliffhanger, and that ensures that the audience sticks around after the commercials to see the rest of the story. Now, it's important to remember that there are different types of cliffhangers, and you'll want to use these different types while you're writing a story, because if you just use the same one over and over and over, there's going to be the law of diminishing returns. The audience is going to be less enthused every time they see it. So I have three types for you right here to keep in mind. The first type is when you have a character who is in danger or they're in a weak moment. This is probably the most dramatic type of cliffhanger. Oftentimes you'll have a character in a life and death situation, and we're wondering what is going to happen to them next. And we have to keep reading the rest of the story in order to find out. The second type of cliffhanger is a shocking revelation. And this means that you end a chapter with a new piece of information that changes the audience's perception of either a character or the story as a whole. So you might have a situation where one of the major side characters who's been helping the hero throughout the story, maybe we learn that that side character is actually working for the villain. And then the audience wonders, well, how is that going to play out? How is that going to affect the hero as the story progresses? And then the third type of cliffhanger is a character reaction or realization. You might see these in mystery stories. You'll have a detective who's trying to piece together evidence. All of a sudden the light bulb goes off in his head and he says, I figured it out. I know who the killer is. Or I figured it out. I know where they move the body. And then the reader has to move on to the next chapter in order to find out. Now, cliffhangers are great, and I highly recommend including them in your stories, but there are some dangers to be aware of when you are using them. I already mentioned that you don't want to use the same type of cliffhanger again and again and again, otherwise it'll diminish the effect. But there are also some types of cliffhangers that I have a problem with. For instance, false alarm cliffhangers. These are a type of cliffhanger where you end a chapter with something highly dramatic, something high stakes, and then you pay off that cliffhanger later on by showing that the high stakes weren't that high at all, or the moment really wasn't that dramatic. You might have a scene, for instance, where maybe the main character encounters a rabid dog, and it looks like it's going to be a dangerous moment, but then right there, when we pick up in the next chapter, we find out that that dog is harmless, or maybe somebody comes over to pat the dog on the head and calm him down, and it's just... It's a cheap moment. Those false alarm cliffhangers, try to avoid them. If you're going to use them, maybe you could use them once or twice in a story, but don't overdo it, otherwise your audience will get upset. Another thing to keep in mind, don't force cliffhangers into your stories. If they naturally arise or they naturally fit within the context of your story, by all means use them, but don't try to just shoehorn them in there just for the sake of having them. Make sure they contribute to the plot. And then one final thing to keep in mind here, be aware of your audience and their expectations. Certain readers, like for instance people who read the thriller genre, will expect there to be lots of cliffhangers. Other times you might have somebody who's reading a more laid-back book and they're not going to be expecting cliffhangers at much. Maybe sparsely throughout the story, they'll pop up every now and then to move the story along, but you won't have every single chapter ending on a dramatic moment or with a key piece of information just shocking the world or anything like that. Alright, now before I wrap up this video, I want to give you some tips on mastering cliffhangers, how to get the most out of your cliffhangers. First thing to keep in mind, make sure that they are abrupt. You want them to be short and snappy. If you're writing a book and you want to end a chapter on a cliffhanger, that cliffhanger should be only a sentence or two, maybe a few brief, quick sentences that get the message across. You don't want to drag things out. You want it to be a snappy moment that gets the audience propelled into the next chapter. Number 2, remember to put a question into your reader's head. That's the whole purpose of a cliffhanger. You want to get your audience wondering about what is going to happen next, or what is going to become of a certain character, or how a certain piece of information is going to play out. Number 3, use character point of view to your advantage. Use it to create suspense. And this is especially effective when you have a story that has more than one point of view character. If you end a chapter with character A, and character A is in a dire situation, and then you cut over to character B's storyline, then things are moving along smoothly. Things are moving along regardless of what's happening in character B's storyline. We're moving through that because we want to find out what's going to happen to character A. So keep that in mind when you're bouncing back and forth between different plot lines. You can use a cliffhanger to keep the audience in suspense until you pay it off later. Number 4, the recipe for a good cliffhanger is closure plus a new problem. This means that when your characters are going through the story, they're going to have goals. They're going to pursue those goals, and they're going to face conflict and obstacles as a result. And then they're going to overcome those obstacles, and there's going to be some kind of resolution. And when you get that resolution, you also want to create new problems in the process. Now, for an example, here's a very basic example. Let's say we're writing a romantic subplot. And our main character, he's a guy, he's pursuing the girl of his dreams. He wants to ask her out. So he goes up to her, he asks her if she wants to do something this weekend, and she says yes. Yes is the resolution there. But we want to end this chapter on a cliffhanger, so we'll say that when she says yes, maybe she asks him to do something he's very uncomfortable with. Maybe he had a bad experience snowboarding once and he broke his leg and it's haunted him forever, and she says, hey, why don't we go snowboarding? Then you would end the chapter there on that particular cliffhanger, and that would get the audience wondering what is going to happen with these two going forward. And then tip number 5 is to vary up your cliffhangers in terms of impact and tone. I talked earlier in the video about how you don't want to reuse the same type of cliffhanger again and again and again. Now, when you are using those 3 basic types, you can measure out different impact or different tone in order to create varied cliffhangers. You want to vary things up, you want to keep things fresh. Now let me give you some quick examples to illustrate what I mean here. For impact, let's say here's an example that has a cliffhanger that is soft in tone, or it's minor in tone. Lauren glanced out the window. An unfamiliar car pulled into her driveway. So if we ended a chapter with that, it's pretty soft in tone because that unfamiliar car could be any number of possibilities. It could be positive, it could be negative, it could be neutral. It gets us curious about what's going to happen next, but it's not necessarily a major impact or it's raising the stakes in a major way. Now, on the other hand, let's look at a cliffhanger with more dramatic impact. Lauren glanced out the window. An unfamiliar man stood in her driveway with a rifle. He pointed it at her and fired. So that has much more impact, raises the stakes right to the roof, and you have a situation where we have to figure out, okay, did she get shot? Is she going to survive? All kinds of major life-threatening questions are at play here. Keep in mind, you want to save cliffhangers like this for bigger moments in your story. You don't want every single chapter ending with somebody getting shot, otherwise the effect will be diminished. So I hope this helps. Question of the day, what's your favorite story that uses a lot of cliffhangers? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of either one of my books and be sure to leave reviews on Amazon. Bad Parts is great if you like small town horror. It's about people trading away their sick and injured body parts in order to get healthy again. And then Entry Wounds is great if you like thrillers. It's about a guy who picks up a haunted gun and he cannot put it down until he kills 6 people with it. Also, be sure to check out my other videos, like, share, and subscribe, and as always, remember to keep on writing.